Hello, and welcome to the latest installment of Law & Order, the series where I'm just kidding. I was watching Gaming Harry, the guy who inspired me to start making these videos, and I thought it'd be funny if I did a little reference to him. But Silent Hill 2 set a golden standard for psycho-horror games by showing players how internal fear and guilt can materialize as external locations and creatures, how the things our minds push down can return in forms we have to face, how when you suppress your deeper selves, it ruins you. Now, the story we're about to look at reminded me of that approach and how it utilizes psychological ideas to structure its entire experience. The difference is, in this game we step into the role of a psychologist named Desmond Wales, and we move through the inner traumas of his patients. We observe their recordings, their backgrounds, and the events that shape their sufferings. However, as we try to piece together what happened to his patients, we also end up having to track the signs of a larger problem that affects the entire town that this all takes place in. The game connects the personal issues of each patient with that broader incident, and it presents both layers as one investigation. And so, today, as requested from some of you subscribers, I want to walk us through that story and point out the psychological concepts and ideas that support each moment. Remember, this is a story explained, not a lore video. There is a difference. With me, you get answers, some psychological discussions, and a journey. But with that being said, since you're still here, you're coming with me. Welcome to
In Sound Mind. They say curiosity killed the cat. I killed the cat. Curiosity only brought her to me.
In Blackest Night, we move backward over waters that have an odd discoloration to them. The surface has layers of disturbed hues that hint of something in the water. As we motion through the flooded coastal town of Milton Haven, we are brought to our protagonist, the psychologist. Gaining consciousness in the basement of his apartment building, shakes and quakes destabilize his nerves. Wondering what happened and how he got there, he carries through the service tunnel and discovers a strange substance. Unearthly in its appearance, however, being next to a drum, it becomes entirely earthly in its form. Immediately, he begins to postulate if this is some sort of man-made chemical. But as whatever this stuff is seeps out of the barrel, it begins to disturb the very foundation of his mind, blurring his vision, ringing into his ears. The psychologist steps away. Being near the substance for too long seems to rapidly corrode his being. Walking down the cold and empty halls behind him, he finds a flashlight and can now pierce the veil of shadows. However, walking back down the empty cold halls before him, he sees it actually isn't so empty, and he's not alone, because somebody left a chair and a note. The paper is covered in patches of purple, pink, and green that match the same unnatural colors leaking from the barrel. The word
Hello
is written in uneven ink, and shady strokes make the message feel unstable. A sense of ominousness settles into the psychologist's psyche. Someone else is moving through these halls, somebody is watching him. But carrying onward, he finds an elevator and rides it to the second floor, moving towards a window where a cat looks at him with glowing eyes before it jumps away. When he steps into the dead end and looks out through the window, he wonders if he is in sound mind, because when he turns around, he sees that the walls have pulled apart and opened into a new space that extends into the darkness. Proceeding through this new area leads him to his old office, the place where he held therapy sessions, and this is when the phone begins to ring.
There he is. Long have I waited for this moment, to watch as you scramble for your last breath, as you try to make sense of your reality and the gravity it carries, pulling you down. Ooh, I can't contain my excitement. I will have you, Desmond Wales. I will have all of you.
Dr. Wales takes a look around his office, seeing his old tape recorder which he would use to record sessions with his patients. Next to it, his leather chairs. Leaving his office, he walks to the opposite end of the hall and sees a door with a bright light emanating from it. Except, He remembered having arrived here through the hall with the elevator. The doctor walks back and wonders where that hall went, but it seems there may not be another way forward, so, opening the door, blinded by the light, he's home. Nothing beats the comforts and security of one's abode. And yet, outside, rumbling could still be heard, reminding him that even though it looks like home, it most definitely is not. He observes a paper from a Mayer Pharmaceuticals, a company that's built its presence in the town of Milton Haven. The message thanks residents for their support and describes the company as part of the local community. The tone of the letter presents Mayer Pharmaceuticals as a friendly neighbor, and yet one may find it odd how a company felt the need to reassure everyone. Turning on the TV, the only thing on is the emergency broadcast that seemingly went out to everybody in town. However, that is when Wales finds a white tape with his name on it, Desmond. He wonders to himself if he was the one who recorded this, as nobody else could have. He strums his guitar and remembers his passion and aptitude for playing. But when he tries to open his bedroom door, it's locked, and he can't seem to find the key. With no choice but to play the tape back in his office, when he does, Desmond appeared to have entered his tape, or rather a remnant of his own memory as he strolls on the boardwalk under the moonlight. Red lights from the floating markers blink through the fog on the waters, and the jagged rocks around them jut like broken skyward swords. A single lamp stands at the end of the path, and its steady glow guides him.
In an unexpected turn of events, it seems I'm the one who's losing my mind. Why or how this is all happening is beyond me. But as strange as this is, I'm equally as fascinated as I am scared.
Proceeding to the next lamppost, the same cat from before is here, peering down at him. Playing the next recording, Desmond's voice devolves into panic and fear as he talks about how things in the town haven't been same since a crash. But he doesn't go further on said crash. He instead elaborates about how his feelings of dread mirror that of his other patients, other residents of Milton Haven. So far, all he's gathered is that there was a crash and somehow something is affecting the people who live here. Desmond speaks with guilt in his voice as he laments that his patients are dying. And then he mentions Virginia by name. In an effort to understand what is happening and how everybody is being affected, he decides to go over all of their cases. He tries to discern the situation, but the process becomes harder as the infection begins to affect him as well. Entering a lone door, the doctor returns to his office. The light flickers on, signifying that whatever Desmond is doing, he's already doing it. Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. Wherever he's going, that's where he'll be. Nope, that doesn't work either. Whatever Wales is doing is working. Noticing the cat food bowl on the floor with the name Tanya on it, he turns to see the cat that's been stalking him.
Tanya? How? I mean, hi. I'm having a weird day. Everything okay with you? All right. Good kitty.
Tanya doesn't say anything, despite Desmond talking to her as if she'll respond as all cat owners do. But he was surprised to see her here, wondering how she got here. On the way to the elevator, the phone rings.
Do you know how a Rorschach test works? I show you an ink blot, and you sneak your way into an interpretation, pretending to fix other people's problems while avoiding your own. What nonsense. Well, there's an ink blot, there's a problem. Try and avoid your problems now.
The Rorschach test is something many of you have probably seen in movies or games, so I want to explain what that actually is. It was created by Hermann Rorschach in 1921, and it uses 10 ink blot cards that don't represent anything in specific. When somebody takes the test, they look at each blot, and they say what they think it might be, and then they explain which part of the image led them to that concept. But what you're really seeing is how a person makes sense of something that is unclear, because the human mind has to create meaning when something does not give direct answers. You will see the Rorschach test used in pop culture as if the ink blots reveal hidden truths about a character or expose some deep secret that they're carrying, but this makes the test look dramatic. It works well in psychological horror because it gives the impression that the mind is speaking through the image. However, in reality, the Rorschach test does not provide that kind of information, so it's not empirical in the same way structured psychological assessments are, especially because different examiners can interpret the same response differently, and the results don't stay consistent over repeated tests. Yet, what it does show is how a person approaches ambiguity, how they use logic or emotion in that process, and whether their thinking stays stable. So when you see the Rorschach appear on screen, just remember and understand that it is being used as a symbol more than a measurement. But moving on, the hall ahead sits in a wash of violet light that reflects across the patterned wallpaper and the framed pictures on the wall. Desmond runs over shards of broken glass and torn police tape scattered across the floor. Each step makes a brittle crack from the glass, and a soft dragging noise from the tape. This space he's in, it feels suspended. He enters the apartment of one of his patients, Virginia. Inside, we find a letter from a small grocery store that thanks the residents for their patronage over the years, but it also explains that they're closing because a larger supermarket had made it impossible for them to stay open. Looking around, we find a broken mirror, a clock stuck on 12:40, and a letter from Virginia's parents worried about her because she hasn't made contact with them in some time. It is worth mentioning that while her dad insisted they send her money, her mom doesn't want her to become a beggar and insists that she finds a different way to make money instead of trying to sell her dolls. But Desmond would begin to wonder how he was even able to see all of this. How could he see Virginia's apartment, all the little details, the letters, if he's never been here? Soon in her room, he would discover a note on her floor, reminding herself not to stay in bed. In her drawer is a receipt from Never Lose Hope Hospital, where it seems that Virginia was admitted for a day, and judging by the cost of the operating room, one could assume that she got hurt, or maybe hurt herself. Desmond would discover a poem on her vanity, with a mirror shattered here as well. Virginia writes about a knife wrapped in linen. She has inner turmoil that is cutting away at her, one slice at a time. Grabbing Virginia's purple cassette tape of his recorded therapy sessions with her, he leaves. But he is reminded that ever since he got here, he hasn't been alone, because just then, the phone rings.
It's unbearable, isn't it? The pain of losing a patient. Virginia trusted you and she died because of it. What will you achieve by listening to her tape? Vindication? Absolution? Retribution for your misdeeds? Think about it.
Almost back at his office, the way is blocked by one of those barrels, along with that near ethereal substance. But then the phone rings again, and the voice on the other side taunts Desmond, saying how the karate lessons he took when he was younger made him think that he could fight his way through life with bare fists alone, but that this time, he's gonna need to arm himself with a weapon. However, it is his last line before he hangs up on us that makes me realize something. The voice says,
"Trust me, I'm a doctor."
Desmond would begin to question his reality, and if this substance is somehow affecting him. But what about the voice who keeps calling him? Is that just a darker, more sinister version of himself? He did say he was a doctor, and he knows so much about Desmond's past. All of these questions running through his head. But regardless, Wales aims to arm up with a pistol. Finding a note from somebody with only the initial L, it seems they've left parts of a pistol all around the apartment complex. While Desmond doesn't know if L meant to leave it for him or somebody else, it's clear that L was a prepper, and he was expecting something that would require the use of lethal force. Assembling the gun, the doctor can now shoot those barrels to make them explode. Doing so down the hall, he finds a pill called the Technol, which makes him stealthier, but it's also purple, which matches Virginia's color scheme. As Wales is about to make it past the blockade to his office, the phone rings again. The sinister voice slithers in, warning that if he looks further into Virginia's death, he might end up dead as well. But he says not to get him wrong, laughing about how he does want Desmond to die, just not yet. So he sneers, saying not to shoot himself with a pistol. If this voice is another version of Desmond talking to himself, I think it's interesting that it's driving him towards death. It begs the question if this other self is a result of the chemicals spilling from the barrels, and if Desmond's other patients also had a sinister voice stalking and taunting them towards suicide. Inserting Virginia's tape, his office walls begin to shift. Dust drifts from the ceiling in small bursts, and the light bulb above him flickers with uneven pulses. The light shining through the window rises and falls in a steady pattern, almost as if the sun outside is moving through its entire cycle in seconds and Desmond is being sent back in time. Back in the space between, Desmond finds tapes of Virginia. In it, she confides that she'd been shopping at that grocery store that shut down for practically her entire life. The new supermarket in town ruined this for her, forcing her to have to go there instead. However, Virginia is extremely disheartened to the point where even she thinks she's going crazy over this change. Desmond reassures her that change can be uncomfortable and that her feelings are valid. She adamantly states that she refuses to shop at Homa Mart. However, when Desmond suggests perhaps shopping outside of town, she frantically expresses that that would be even worse. Virginia doesn't feel safe going outside the bounds of what she knows, and yet Desmond encourages her, saying that what they have is an opportunity for them to work through this adjustment in small steps. Virginia is still unsure, scared, saying that it could be overwhelming, and yet Desmond says she can do it anyway. She just needs to breathe. Under the dark purple clouds, Homa Mart stands before him as bright purple lights shine from the inside out. He opens the door and walks through the entrance of the supermarket. So, by now, you've probably become aware about the colors in this game. But did you know that colors actually play a role in psychology? Because they influence your attention, your emotion, and the way that your brain organizes information. Humans are visual creatures. Your visual system literally reacts to colors before it reacts to details. A color shapes your mood or expectations before you notice anything else. This comes from basic neural responses where some wavelengths raise your arousal and others lower it. And that's why in real life you experience this every day in stores, restaurants, YouTube thumbnails, clothing choices, and games, because they all use color to direct how you feel. InSound Mind does the same thing by giving each patient's world a specific color that prepares we the gamers for what they are going through. The color sets the tone before you understand their story. With Virginia, that color is purple, and purple sits between red and blue, which kind of causes our brains to receive mixed signals. You see, red is energizing, but blue is calming, which induces purple with this uncertain emotional effect. It feels steady and intense at the same time. The developers are trying to give you a sense that Virginia's world is unstable. And this all matches Virginia's anxiety, her distress about her appearance, her shattered sense of self. When you enter her world, purple becomes the first sign that her reality is slipping, and it pulls Desmond into that same destabilizing and disconnected feeling. As we continue through the story, other colors appear in the same deliberate way, each tied to the emotional environment of another patient. And we'll go through those soon, but for now, Desmond learns that something tragic happened here at Homa Mart. But also, he's not alone here either. At first, he hears a woman humming. Peering closer into the distance, he sees a girl floating, tendrils flowing from under her dress, but her back is turned so we can't see her face, and then she disappears in a dark smoke. Pressing on, Desmond finds more information on the events that transpired. An advisory letter showing that the police were here, taping areas off and cautioning other officers of all the broken glass. He finds another note on paper much like the one from Virginia's bedroom, hinting at an accident but also wondering why there's so many mirrors. But when Desmond finds a long mirror in one of the aisles, that ghost was called the Watcher, and she doesn't like being looked at. In fact, if you replay it again in slow motion, you'll see she was actually holding up a purple mask to her face. But turning to look at the now broken mirror, Desmond finds a large shard of glass wrapped in linen, and he says it's as sharp as a knife, reminiscent of Virginia's poem. Using this large shard of the mirror, Desmond slashes the police tape away, and on the desk nearby he sees a note. But this is the same kind of paper and handwriting as whomever was stalking Desmond back in the apartment. It writes that she couldn't stand the sight of herself, but that she needs to see reality, and how Desmond needs to help her see what she needs to do. Whoever wrote this taunts Desmond, circling with a big red circle on reflection, hinting, because he can't figure it out himself, that in order to progress, he needs to lure the Watcher to more mirrors. And so he does. The Watcher continues to viciously attack on sight whenever she sees him, but when he holds the mirror shard up, she runs away scowling. Looking in the mirror also reveals hidden messages, for example one that says, "It's not my fault, I'm a monster," insinuating that Virginia doesn't exactly place all the blame on herself for how she turned out. Soon, Desmond would find a Homomart paper, talking about postcards, but the thing to highlight here are the names of the postcards, which I think you'll come to have a small appreciation for in hindsight. Homomart, Point Icarus, Mayor, and Elysium State Park. Wandering around the supermarket, Desmond would be startled by mannequins, and when he preemptively hits one of them thinking that they'd come alive to attack him, instead the sound of the attack echoed and reverberated throughout the store, alerting the Watcher of his presence. As she whispered to stop watching her, she lurched at Desmond and straight towards the mirror, shattering it. Delving further into the back of the store, he would find a police incident report detailing the tragic event that took place here. On March 26, 1997, at 1612, 25-year-old female Virginia was inside of Homomart. It's also worth noting that this game actually takes place in 1997. The manager reports that she was distraught and breaking things around the store. Of course, the rest of the report is torn apart.
A distraught woman, they called her. Quite the way to say she was out of her mind. You could have helped her. You knew how. But you were too busy looking at her scars, weren't you?
On the floor, we find another note telling Desmond that the manager was hiding something inside of his safe, an addiction. Desmond would find the code to the safe later on Google to discover that the Homomart manager was into pills, the same ones that Desmond continues to find in various places. Pushing further in, one of the doors would be locked, and he would need to redirect power, but after flipping some switches...
Give up.
Fun fact, my wife was reading one of her books next to me, and she started laughing because she saw me jump and mash all of the buttons on my controller when this happened. I love my wife. Desmond would endure quite a few jump scares at the store. As he continues, he discovers more notes that describe how strongly Virginia believed that everybody held negative opinions of her. Each message shows the level of distress that she lived with and how deeply paranoid she became about people watching her and judging her. This would incite and fuel feelings of intense self-hate and other self-deprecating thoughts. Later, the doctor would locate the next torn piece of the incident report. Picking up from the last note where it said that Virginia was breaking things in the store, it continues that when dispatch pulled up to the scene, she had stabbed herself in the stomach and slit it across her neck. It further elaborates that others reported she had issues being publicly seen or seeing her own reflection, hence the paranoia and broken mirrors.
Determination. I have to admit, to stab yourself in the gut and still have enough determination to pull out the glass and slice your own throat open. I almost want to stand up and give her a round of applause.
Desmond found out how his patient died. He knew what she was dealing with internally, but even with the mystery of her history out of the way, it still didn't answer how her story connects to what happened in the town as a whole. He still didn't know what crashed into the town and afflicted all the residents, nor did he know how he was able to view Virginia's thoughts and memories. However, the story continues, where Desmond would come across the final torn piece of the police report, where it explains that Virginia had a panic attack from being overwhelmed at Homomart, and as a consequence, she broke a mirror. This caused people around to antagonize and further exacerbate Virginia's mental state, which drove her to picking up one of the mirror shards on the floor and ending her torment. It also mentions that she may have been in a relationship with one of the staff members, David, but nothing more comes of this. At the very bottom, it notes that they notified Virginia's mother of what happened.
What was it you wrote in her file? Patient was encouraged to establish routine errands that would put her outside. Wow. No wonder her mother blames you.
Coming upon a dollhouse in a child's poem, presumably written by Virginia when she was young, he learns about something that happened during her childhood. She describes her mom in the kitchen, her dad napping by the fire, and her brother spending time in the attic. She then mentions a sudden crash, calls herself bad, and says she became trash, showing how early she began to internalize blame and shame. When you stop to zoom in at the dollhouse that she was in, you learn that Virginia was in the bathroom looking at a mirror that for some reason crashed and smashed into her, causing blood to spill all over the place. Entering a tunnel with glow-in-the-dark glitter stars lighting the path forward, Desmond reaches a mirror and sees the word hated. It was arranged on blocks inside of the reflection. He then places the same blocks outside of the mirror to form the word in real space. But the moment the word is completed, Virginia appears.
My mask! My mask!
Turning to look at the mirror, Desmond would be blamed for taking away her choice to end her own existence, but how regardless, ultimately he still failed. However, it does bring up an interesting discussion I don't think we've had on this channel yet. Is it morally right or wrong to stop somebody from committing suicide? Yes. And the way I think about it is anybody with SI isn't in their right state of mind. On an ethical, medical, psychological level, I think it is the correct and responsible thing to do for your fellow human. When somebody isn't in sound mind, just like when they're under the influence, people often make decisions that they don't really want. They want something else. They want to stop feeling pain or misery. They don't actually want to stop living. Their SI or actions stem from a certain crisis. But once that crisis is gone, they realize that they're in a better place. And so stopping them is absolutely the best thing to do. You should support somebody who isn't in sound mind.
It's okay. I see you. You can rest now.
Thank you.
I wonder how she got those scars. However, Desmond, as he's leaving, still maintains that Virginia would not have done this without some kind of external influence, again, hearkening back to the fact that something is plaguing Milton Haven. With a door appearing before the psychologist, he leaves the supermarket and listens to more of their recorded sessions. Virginia would tell him about how she got the scars on her face. When she was a kid, she accidentally knocked over the mirror, which smashed into her face, cutting it. Her face was permanently disfigured as a result, but sadly, her mother still made her go out in public, even signing her up for beauty pageants. Virginia hated her mother for telling her that nobody would judge her despite her face, but that wasn't the experience that she had. Everybody looked at her, and so she hated everybody. With that, Desmond would leave the pain of Virginia and return to his office, where you and I are now going to go over the psychology portion for Virginia. I want to dive into her file and what her level are actually showing us psychologically. First, Virginia's notes describe a woman who lives in constant fear of being judged. She avoids public spaces, hides in her room, and interprets any attention as criticism. This fits closely with the DSM-5 description for social anxiety disorder, which every time I look at I think of the acronym SAD, which is sad, but it's also defined by a strong fear of negative evaluation. And also, it was her accident with the bathroom mirror that left her permanently scarred, which was the catalyst for these issues. I think it's also important to point out how her mom handled this, and how essentially it was emotional invalidation. I think a lot of parents do this to their kids. Now, while her mother didn't, or at least we didn't see, her mother ridicule or insult her appearance, she did, however, force Virginia into situations that she was not emotionally ready for. Research shows that when a child's fear or pain gets ignored, especially after something traumatic, it can lead to a lot of shame and avoidance later on in life. In fact, one study found that when parents shut down or minimize a child's emotions, it teaches the child to hold everything in. As they grow up, because of their unsupportive home environments, that pattern turns into avoidant coping behaviors and higher levels of anxiety and depression. However, circling back to her, as Desmond writes, trauma from past injury, Virginia would start avoiding her reflection and treating even neutral interactions as judgment. These behaviors match patterns seen in body dysmorphic disorder. People with BDD often avoid mirrors, focus on what they believe are flaws in their appearance, and assume others can see those flaws even when nobody's saying anything about them. A game I covered called Lost in Vivo explores BDD in a very similar way, well, a more horrific way. But the other reason her childhood physical trauma is so definitive, as is pretty much all childhood events for us, is that it's linked to higher rates of anxiety and negative self-appraisal later on in life, distinctly because of how early pain disrupts the way that our brains form associations with danger and safety. And you can see, unfortunately, exactly how Virginia turns out at 25 years old. In the game, Desmond diagnoses her with personality disorder NOS. Now, back when that term was used, it described people who had long-term patterns that caused real problems in their daily life, but it didn't fit perfectly into one specific personality disorder. It meant that traits were still serious and persistent, just not a clean match for one single category. Now, today we don't use personality disorder NOS. It's been replaced with other specified personality disorder and unspecified personality disorder. The idea is the same though. However, Virginia's anxiety is also tied to years of being watched in environments like beauty pageants. I don't remember if they're still around, but I remember when there used to be TV shows about children or child pageants, and even back then, the whole setup felt strange to me. It was weird. I looked into the research, and pageant involvement does show higher rates of body dissatisfaction and a stronger focus on perceived flaws because those environments teach children that their appearance is the most important thing about them. But when it comes to the Watcher, her monster is a psychological symbol for all of these experiences. It represents her fear of being seen. It becomes aggressive and attacks when observed, and it avoids mirrors, which mirrors real therapeutic interventions. Exposure-based treatments for anxiety and body image disorders use what is called controlled confrontation, keyword controlled, with feared stimuli, including mirrors, to slowly reduce fear responses. But when Desmond encourages Virginia to go out to Homomart, even though she didn't feel like she was ready, he was trying to use graded exposure, which is a common part of exposure therapy. The goal of graded exposure is to help somebody face a situation that scares them in small, controlled, again, important keywords there, controlled steps. And over time, the brain learns that the situation isn't actually dangerous, and the anxiety slowly goes down. But real exposure therapy has very strict guidelines, and for a good reason. It requires the patient's full consent, it needs a clear plan with goals that feel manageable for the patient, it needs coping tools that the patient can use when the anxiety arises. It also needs a safe and predictable environment where the patient feels supported the entire time. And Virginia did not have any of that. She wasn't ready. She didn't feel safe. She didn't understand the plan. She only felt pressured. And this is where Desmond fooked all the way up. He noticed her fear, but he pushed her anyway. He treated exposure like a simple challenge instead of a structured therapeutic process. Like, the dude didn't give her small steps. He just threw her into the fray and said, yeah, you'll be all right. He did not prepare her for what she might feel. And he didn't recognize how fragile she already was because of her trauma and shame, even though she was showing all the signs right in front of him. Maybe that other voice's comments about not noticing because he was too busy looking at her scars was true. Yeah, sending her straight into a large, crowded supermarket was far beyond what Virginia could handle emotionally. So even though Desmond was trying to help her get back into the world, he skipped the most important parts of exposure therapy. This leads to Desmond feeling guilt over his patient dying, as he should, in my opinion. Agoraphobia also came to mind while I was scripting this because of that one episode from the TV show Shameless with the mom who had agoraphobia and like she just was afraid to go outside. I think in a lot of ways, Virginia exemplifies this as well. But when you look at everything together, the accident, the scar, her mother pushing her back into public too soon, stores she depended on closing, and her fear of mirrors, what we have is a girl, a broken girl shaped by shame, overstimulation, and emotional invalidation from both her family and her therapist. This game exaggerates these elements into monsters and purple worlds, but the psychological framework it uses to build Virginia's story matches real-world research and clinical patterns. However, at the very bottom of Desmond's analysis, he pens in that as of late, she has an increased sense of anxiety, unknown dread, and fear, reminding us that something else is happening in Milton Haven.
Desmond, darling?
Who said that?
Why, I did, of course.
How? You can talk now?
I mean, you could argue that I always could, and you just didn't care to listen. Look, let's not waste any more time on how unbelievable this all may be and tackle the situation at hand. You are going to die, Desmond, if you do not get to the bottom of all this madness. Simply, you must keep a level head and find a way through this. I will help you as best as I possibly can. Now, concentrate. Who might have some answers?
I don't know. This is weird.
Patience, Desmond. Patience and grace.
Patience? My patience?
Don't you find it curious? You can enter Virginia's apartment and she doesn't even live here. Something strange is happening. You would benefit from knowing what that is.
It sounds like a plan.
Good luck.
Entering the apartment of a second patient, Alan, Desmond finds a tape and a letter filled with raw frustration. Alan explains that he was standing near a lighthouse when a woman accused him of looking at her the wrong way. Her boyfriend stepped in and punched Alan in the gut. In his note, Alan expresses his overwhelming surge of anger. Taking some time to explore the apartment, Desmond would find a local newsletter from the Gazette, welcoming Mayor Pharmaceuticals and Homomart into the town of Milton Haven. It's clear that Mayer's presence here is casting a deeper and longer shadow than initially expected. Heading back to the office, Desmond receives another call from his stalker.
Alan Shore, the one-man freak show, who made all your other patients seem well-adjusted by comparison. From the first moment he stepped into your office, you knew he was doomed. Have fun?
Then he speaks with Tanya, who postulates that there might be actually something of a link between Virginia and Alan's case, further supporting the theory that all the patients and Desmond himself are connected somehow. Perhaps Big Pharma is involved. Putting Alan's yellow tape into the recorder, it's time for another journey into another patient's mind. Psychologically, yellow often signals emotions related to uncertainty, alertness, and nervous energy, or fragile optimism. However, to me, it makes me think of sickness. This time, Dr. Wales is surrounded by shipwreckage all throughout the in-between, and listening to Alan Shore's therapy session, he does sound nervous.
Sure, tape's running. Thank you for agreeing to be recorded.
Oh, should I just start talking? What do you want to know?
What made you decide to seek counseling?
Man, Doc, it's just weird. As in, I feel weird, like I'm weird all the time, you know? I'm not saying this right. People think I'm weird, and it's cool, I am, but I shouldn't feel weird, right?
How exactly do you feel weird?
Off, odd, slightly tilted. I've had these nightmares. Ever since I can remember, I've always had these horrific dreams I can't explain. They recur, man, like there are themes in them that keep coming back, and honestly, Doc, it's been such a constant that I shape my life around them, you know?
But then in his following recordings, Alan talks about how he's had recurring and intense nightmares on a consistent basis, so much so that he's molded his life around them. However, he thought it was just a normal thing to constantly have horrific nightmares. He furthers that his whole life, he could feel the presence of cold shadows that had swallowed and petrified him constantly. In his little nightmares, he even describes seeing a monster with a wax face, which he calls the Candleman. He also shares that once he saw a girl in a yellow jacket running around a ship, but he was just joking about that part. However, Alan does say he got used to the dark terrors, so much so that it got to the point where he liked it. Running along the shores of Patmos Beach, as the moon haunts him, Desmond would hear something big off in the distance, something that was knocking down trees, and he knew that whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be easy to get through. But he needed to uncover what happened to his patient, so even if something was lurking in the dark, he pressed on. On the other side of the beach, Desmond would find a container with barrels of that substance spilling out of it and into the water. This looks oddly familiar, much like how the water appeared to be at the beginning of the game. The slight, luminescent, discolored and unnatural hue. It was whatever liquid substance was in these barrels. But then he would come up to a fishing cabin with a radiant light bursting out of it. Inside was a light bulb, but the illustrious power it had was enough to illuminate the darkest of shadows, the brightest day in blackest night. However, when he acquired it, something went wrong, because off in the distance, the lighthouse blasted a ray of red light, and it was malevolent enough to destroy the fishing cabin. This light could hurt Desmond, so with God's speed, he sprinted up the mountain and understood that whatever brought him here, whatever darkness had induced his patient into slumber, he'd find the answers at the lighthouse, and Alan would wake.
In Greek mythology, Icarus flies too close to the sun and it kills him. I'll spare you the analogy. In our story, you're going to bring the sun to Alan, and the both of you will burn.
Down the road, Desmond finds a truck that had crashed and spilled a bunch of those drums all over. Inside the container, he discovers an incident report form with blood and ink prints on it. This is from Mayer Pharmaceuticals. Once again, we see that they have their hands all over Milton Haven. The person in question is Max Nygaard, which if you rearrange his last name backwards and say it, it sounds like Dragon. Max Dragon. We see that presumably his wife Alice was his emergency contact, but got crossed out. The incident occurred on March 8, 1997, a couple of weeks before Virginia's incident at Homomart. Max was a driver for Mayer Pharma, but got into an accident here near the Icarus Lighthouse, causing the truck to crash. Max explains that he initially thought it was a blown tire, but when he looked again, something bizarre had happened. He could only describe it as the road was melting. Looking around, Desmond would find venomous black tendrils consuming entire cars, melting them into the ground. The question is what he seeing the same thing that Max saw? Did the ground really melt, causing him to crash? Advancing forward through the ever-shifting shades, something up ahead was wreaking havoc and causing car alarms to blare. However, whatever it wasn't actually big. It was really low to the ground, but covered in dust. That's when the phone rang. Rung?
As he climbed higher and higher in the sky, do you think Icarus contemplated how weird a person he was? Why can't he just be normal? Do you think his parents pushed him to be a lawyer? To be a doctor? Like your parents did?
Inside of a nearby info center was a paper from the Gazette that highlighted a lighthouse fire. Reading on, Alan Shore, Desmond's own patient, was the lighthouse operator, but was he the one that started the fire? Another piece of the Gazette would be located shortly up the road on a bench, talking about how in specific the town of Milton Haven seems to have a mystery and history in dealing with unnatural occurrences, reports of ghosts, aliens, missing children. I forgot to mention this, but back in the apartments, there was a mention in a paper about a town-wide, what they would describe as EMP, where everything just shut off at once. Many believed it had to be aliens, and we see that reflected in this paper as well, furthering that Alan's lighthouse fire might be connected. And when we look at the time frame of all the incidents so far, all of his patients' incidents occur within the month of March of 1997. Will the following patients' incidents also occur within the month of March? But what is it about this town that has everybody seeing things? Because they were seeing things even before Mayer Pharmaceuticals got involved. Reading a plaque for the Icarus Lighthouse, at first it seems normal, giving random facts, but then it quickly changes to strangely address Desmond, asking if he's even sure if he's really there, or if this was just a horrific dream. But then it would say, Alan was burned alive by the government. Desmond's brow furrows, pondering if the government is now implicated in everything. But if this was true, why would the government burn Alan to death? Was it because he became this shade? Desmond would use any light source to burn away at the darkness as he tried to find his way forwards towards the top of the lighthouse, towards Alan's wake. Alan did mention he was obsessed with the dark, but for him to become the very thing he feared, enveloped, shrouded in cold shadows, Dr. Wales didn't understand how any of this could happen. Why couldn't he save his patient? While struggling to find a way out of this chawed building, Desmond would remember that he hates puzzles. However, after looking up a guide, he was able to continue. But before doing so, he found a note that simply said, that ship is death, that it bears death's name. With all of the references to Greek mythos that the doctor's been coming across and remembering how much he loved playing Hades, he instantly knows that the ship in question is named Thanatos. Whoever wrote this note says that the ship is a beast and in its belly was a flare gun. Another note that Alan authored would speak of this being the worst nightmare out of all the ones he's had. He says that there was an accident and that it was his fault.
In a world full of darkness, it is reasonable to try and find light. Alan did when he went down to that ship. But did it clear the way, or did it set his world aflame? I dare you to go down there and find out.
All signs point to Thanatos, so Dr. Wales slips out the back to view the lighthouse towering menacingly over him. He shoots bullets at the moon, and then finally descends into the depths of Hades. Walking on a nightmare, Desmond would stand before the USS Thanatos, which had seemingly crashed into the shores of a dark Milton haven. Close by, he would read a letter from the the CIB, warning to stay the fuck out of the Thanatos, that it was dangerous because of the stuff that was inside and how it's everywhere. It alludes to that mysterious psychotoxin that we've been seeing all over town and in the waters. It's highly flammable and will get you as high as a kite in just minutes. Well, life's fast. Sometimes you gotta ignite grass, but from what Desmond's been experiencing, this stuff will get you higher than a Martian, out of this world. However, once aboard the USS Thanatos, he would hear a voice out of nowhere.
Stranger.
It was a woman's voice, distant and weak, breaking through with the same static you hear from a fading radio signal. On deck, Desmond pushed through the shipping containers, while the chemical haze wrapped around him and slipped into his lungs, blurring his vision and pulling at his thoughts. Each breath made the colors smear across the metal walls, and the fumes grew heavier as he moved deeper inside. Upon reaching the final container, bashing the doors open, the space warped into something that was impossible. Rows of containers stretched in every direction, rising and falling into a bright white and purple horizon, an endless expanse of metal and light. Jumping onward, as the metal creaked beneath his feet, up above, a skeletal monster would float overhead. Heading into another long line of containers, when he reaches the end, he would see his therapy chair from his office, which is strange because what is it doing here in Alan's nightmare or memory or whatever this is? But then he turns around, and the same balloons that was over in Virginia's realm was over here too. Eventually Desmond made it out and saw that the ship was sailing out at sea, heading towards Milton Haven with the lighthouse faint in the distance. Radio chatter echoed from inside the Thanatos, but when he stepped in, shadow people moved around the halls. And then, without warning, the lighthouse beam shut down and the ocean darkened. But something massive rose behind the ship, sweeping a searchlight across the waters. The alarms on the Thanatos erupted and the shadow figures scattered in a frantic rush, and then a crash. The Thanatos crashed into the town? Desmond would hear a phone ringing nearby, but he already knew who would be on the other side.
The sun melted away the wax in his wings, and Icarus fell out of the sky and into the ocean where he ground. You're flying too close to the sun, Desmond. Bad things happen to those who snoop.
Agitated by the voice's constant taunting, Desmond grabs the glare fun and shoots into the darkness, causing a small explosion and opening a path forward. But that woman's voice would static into his mind once more. Who was she? Attempting to return to the lighthouse, Desmond blew apart Mayor crates and barrels, dropping a section of the pier down to his level. But before climbing up, he'd find another CIB letter explaining that the Thanatos crashed into Milton Haven, but that it was also carrying a full shipment of Mayor barrels. What caused the ship to crash in the first place? That aside, when the ship went down, the spill was so catastrophic that the CIB had to contain the entire area by sealing off all exits and entrances in and out of town. Whatever this chemical that Mayor was producing, the government didn't want it leaking out into the world. Anybody involved or infected would need to be taken care of. Heading up and dodging a van that came careening down, Desmond would spend the next hour or two navigating his way through the shipyard. The entire time, the Shade hunted him, pulling at his feet and trying to drag him into the sinkhole. Desmond would find another CIB document explaining that, due to improper handling of the shipment, in that it just worsened things for them, their focus had now shifted to include damage control, referencing a civilian driver, Max Dragon, who crashed the truck while transporting the chemicals. The report then outlined how the agency hid the remaining Meyer barrels by spreading them across all of Milton Haven. 4 locations in total, the same ones hinted at back in Virginia's Nightmare: Homo Mart, Point Icarus where Desmond now stood, Mayor's own facility, and Elysium State Park. After escaping the shipyard, Dr. Wales would receive a call.
Bravo! It only took you an hour to find your way past a chain-link fence. That light you've been carrying around seems to be losing its brightness. Perhaps like you, it needs to be put in its place.
It's true. Desmond hadn't realized it, but the flashlight was losing effectiveness. What was once a torch that could expel the darkness was but a faded dying light now. Navigating his way back to the lighthouse, Alan would chase him, saying things such as, "You were supposed to prevent this," but also, "No more spies." Did Alan believe he was being watched? Purging the shadows, Dr. Wales would enter Alan's lighthouse.
Waking up in cold sweat, being haunted by government spies, and loving it is not normal. Neither is losing your patience. Paranoia will eat you whole, won't it?
However, Desmond knew that there had to be some truth to this because the government was clearly trying to cover up its mistake. He started to wonder if Alan, as the lighthouse operator, had been pulled into the situation. Maybe the chemicals affected him, and the CIB staged the fire to get rid of him. Or maybe he saw something he shouldn't have. But there was also the possibility that Alan played a role in the crash itself. In one of his early notes, he described an accident involving the lighthouse light going out. If that happened, Thanatos could have lost its visual marker in the darkness, and in 1997, ships still relied heavily on lighthouse beacons for coastal navigation. Losing that reference could have contributed to the crash. Desmond then found a local newspaper, saying that while Alan was odd, some didn't believe that he would set his own house on fire, even though the police insisted that he did so with a flare gun in a suicide attempt. The reporter doubted the story because a flare gun was something found on ships, hinting that it might have come from the Thanatos and that the fire was orchestrated instead. Desmond's concern grew when he learned that Alan had called the police before the incident, telling them that he saw men in black moving in and out of the crash site. This left 2 possibilities. Either Alan saw something he was never meant to see, and the government silenced him for it, or his patient was already losing grip on reality. Whatever the truth was, Alan remained alive, but trapped in a comatose, unlikely to ever wake again. In his bathroom, he would discover a journal entry where Alan described going to Homo Mart in a nightmare and seeing the Watcher. He was unable to distinguish if it was a dream or reality, but it was terrifying. This caused him to be unable to sleep for 3 days. How was it possible for him to be able to enter Virginia's nightmare as well? Finding another journal entry, Alan would solemnly confess that he was struggling with severe depression. He also denotes that Dr. Wales told him that writing his feelings out could help, but...
You fool. You think you can replace Alan's broken personality with a new one? Simply change it like a light bulb. Go ahead. I can't wait to see it break in your hands.
Rising to the top, Desmond was met with a full blast of red light. This eye would turn and smash the glass all around, and the entire chamber pulsed in harsh patterns, beams folding and stretching across metal walls. Ruby energy burned so bright it looked molten. Heat, pressure. Desmond braced himself, fighting through the interval waves of scorching crimson glares that tried to swallow him whole just as much as the shade's black hole once tried. Using Virginia's knife, Desmond would extinguish Alan's dark light and replace it with a lighter light.
It's okay. The ship, the fire, those weren't your fault. Whatever this chemical is, it's gotta be the source. You're braver than you know.
After pulling Alan out of his own torment and relinquishing him from the guilt that kept him trapped, Desmond became certain that the chemicals were driving his patients into rapid psychological collapse. Every case pointed back to the same source, and he knew that if he kept following the chemical trail, he would uncover exactly what happened to the town and why all of them were falling apart. Traversing the in-between to return to his office, he would listen to more recordings. Alan tried to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. Even though Wales wasn't there to talk to him, Alan explained what happened. He said that he saw the Thanatos coming. Now, as the lighthouse operator, he had a log detailing all the ships he expected to see come in and out, so Alan keeps a lookout. But when he saw the Thanatos, it wasn't on the log. He didn't recognize the ship. But then all of a sudden, a blackout happened, almost as if an EMP went off. The bulb wouldn't turn on, plunging Alan into silent darkness. But out of nowhere, a crash, a boom, and a rumble could be felt. So, he went down to the shore to ensure that no one was hurt. But what he saw when he got there sent him down a spiral of madness. He saw dark monsters, ones that would try grabbing and dragging him into the floor. He continues that he picked up a flare gun to fight the darkness, but when he was back at his house, he noticed that Men in Black and Max Dragon were outside. Alan wanted to go out and warn them about the monsters, but all you could hear in the recording was a knock on the door. Desmond didn't know what to believe. The government came to his door, and then what? Did they really set him up and try to burn him alive to keep him quiet?
You're back. Good. I was getting worried. Things are starting to become unstable around here.
How so?
The ground is shaking and the water outside is rising.
I know what happened to Alan.
I know. I saw. Alan mentioned that driver you were treating. Max Nygaard? Classic bag of cats, that guy. There's probably a door to his house here as well.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Desmond took a moment to gather his thoughts, looking at a selfie he took back in Homomart with whomever the stalker was. But then he'd review the notes he had on Alan. His file lists nightmare disorder, fear of the dark, and schizotypal traits, and when you look at the details of his file, you see how these issues formed one consistent pattern that stayed with him from childhood into adulthood. The major piece is his nightmare disorder. Alan has severe, recurring nightmares that influence how he behaves during the day. Research on nightmare disorder shows that frequent nightmares increase daytime hypervigilance and emotional stress. Alan displays these exact patterns. He closely monitors his surroundings, interprets shadows as animate, and can't tell the difference between dreams and waking life. That is, of course, assuming the pharmaceutical company didn't have anything to do with anything. But when it comes to his phobia of the dark, oddly enough, he would become fascinated and fixated on darkness. But Alan says he feared the darkness ever since childhood, that he molded his life around it, and that instead of helping him gradually face that fear, what his parents did was they kept the lights on for him. That choice probably made him feel safe in that moment, but unfortunately, avoiding a feared situation strengthens the fear through negative reinforcement because the brain never learns that the feared thing is safe. Research on family accommodation of child anxiety backs this up. In a longitudinal cognitive behavioral therapy study with anxious youth, it was found that when parents consistently changed routines or helped their children avoid feared situations, those higher levels of accommodation predicted higher anxiety at the next therapy session. And they argued this happens because avoidance is negatively reinforced and blocks fear extinction. In other words, if you want to help a kid work through a fear, the most effective approach is gradual desensitization, little steps towards the feared thing that teach the brain the situation is safe, and each successful step lowers anxiety response over time. Slowly facing the fear builds real confidence in children because the child learns from experience rather than avoidance. Now, both of Alan's parents died of lung cancer when he was 16. This type of traumatic loss increases the emotional weight that pulls down on pre-existing fears. Trauma reshapes how the brain responds to fear and safety, especially through the amygdala. For Alan, darkness shifted from being an ordinary nighttime environment to a place associated with loss and exposure. This helps explain why later he would value light so strongly and why the lighthouse job felt stabilizing to him. But maybe I'm confused about this, and also I just can't spend too much time on each section talking about everybody because I gotta move on, but I keep perseverating over the weird juxtaposition of how he has this extreme fear of the dark, but also seems to obsess and welcome it. The contrast is a little hard to wrap my head around. But Dr. Wales did note that Alan describes the phobia as the thrill of the ride. He likes being scared. Wales also writes that he might have masochistic tendencies. Sleep deprivation made this all worse. Nightmares already made it hard to get a good night's sleep, but Alan goes 3 days without sleeping at one point. And if we don't, it can kill us. Our body starts to break down. Perceptual distortions begin after about 24 hours without sleep, with hallucination-like experiences often appearing by the 48-hour mark. So when Alan describes going to Homomart in a dream and later remembers the event with vivid detail, this lines up with well-documented sleep loss effects. But we still need to wonder about how reliable is he as a narrator. And at the same time, we still have to respect the lore and that Mayor Pharmaceuticals and the government is likely up to no good. Because he did mention that after Virginia's dream is when he didn't sleep for 3 days. But how reliable is that memory? You know what I mean? However, Alan's schizotypal traits add another layer. Social isolation, discomfort around others, and unusual interpretations of events are linked to schizotypal personality features. These traits increase vulnerability to mild paranoia during stress or confusion. Alan saw an unknown ship crash. He believed he was being watched, and he reported monsters and men in black. These reactions match the patterns of stress-triggered paranoia seen in people with schizotypal traits, similar to what we saw in Virginia. And real quick, for clarity, schizotypal traits are mild and personality-based. Schizophrenia is a much more severe condition that involves a clear loss of reality. Paranoia is often mixed up with schizophrenia, but paranoia is a separate thing, it's its own symptom. It is the belief that somebody is watching or targeting you, and it can appear as a symptom in both schizotypal traits and in schizophrenia, or by itself during high periods of stress. Moreover, Alan believes that he caused the Great Thanatos crash because the lighthouse blackout happened on his watch. Guilt amplifies intrusive thoughts and fuels catastrophic interpretations. The Shade is his monster, just like the Watcher was Virginia's. His monster behaves the way that Alan's mind operates, heavy, consuming, and shaped by fear and uncertainty that built up over many years. But following the chemical trail to Max Dragon's blood-tinted apartment, Desmond would recall that his patients had explosive anger issues, and that he had a daughter named Maddie, whom he would lose custody of to his ex-wife Alice. This further exacerbated his relationship with rage, destroying things all around his apartment. Max was the driver working for Mayor Pharmaceuticals, but after the incident with Alan and the truck crashing, he was fired on March 15th. On the way back to the office,
So you're heading...
So who was Max working for? And what were they doing with those chemicals?
We're about to find out.
I never liked that guy. Watch yourself around him.
Time to play another tape.
Head on a swivel, Desmond.
inserting Max's tape and heading to his in-between, Max had come to Dr. Wales under court mandate. He begins talking about Alice and he vehemently refers to her as his wife, even though she's his ex-wife. Max thinks everybody's out to get him, and the more he talks, the more agitated he gets, convinced that everyone is trying to ruin his life and take away his family. He talks about working for mayors and how he's going to pay for his daughter's college and be a good father. Heading through the door and onto a wrath-painted memory, Desmond proceeds down the railroad track. Coming to the entrance of the factory, he finds a letter discussing a mistake an employee made by letting Max come in despite having been fired. Apparently, he caused a lot of trouble for the company. Following the tracks all the way into a tunnel, Max Dragon was waiting for Desmond. Unfortunately, Max was too bullheaded and angry to die, so with no option, for now Desmond runs away. He takes temporary refuge inside of a factory. Heading down this long tunnel, the phone would ring.
I see you've met your old pal Max. Or what's left of him. I wouldn't say it to his face, but yeesh. You really should do something about those anger issues.
Moving into the assembly control room, we find the ingredients for an experimental drug Mayer worked on called the Lure pill. In order to put a stop to the raging bull, Desmond would need to make the pill. Grabbing the first ingredient, he learns about something called the tryptopsyban mushroom extract, a blue concentrated chemical taken from a fictional mushroom that acts like a very strong hallucinogen, a supercharged psychedelic. It has high potency and can cause sedation, confusion, and vivid hallucinations. Shrooms, man. As Desmond would search for the next ingredients on the 3rd floor, that lady's voice from the Thanatos would come back again.
Dax, but I must believe.
Finding another letter from the CIB, we learned that one of their scientists, Rosemary James, wanted to set up a research station by a radio tower in Elysium Park. The CIB normally wouldn't approve something like this, but their project is falling behind. The state park is technically government property, and nobody's been there in years, so they're considering letting her use it. Desmond learns in another letter that Rosemary had this idea to use electromagnetic radiation through radio signals. Her revelation would become revolutionary for the research that the CIB and Mayer was conducting. In another room, Desmond finds a threatening letter directed at one of the CIB operatives. The government is furious over the Thanatos crash and all the public attention it had garnered, because the resurrection project depended on remaining hidden. Now, the letter never explains what they were trying to resurrect, but the surrounding notes from Mayer point towards some kind of biological material or organism that was essential for their experimental chemicals. Milton Haven was chosen as the base for Mayer Pharma because whatever this material is, I think it might be the mushroom, it originally grew or emerged here. The agency warns that the failed damage control has put the entire operation at risk, that even one witness with a camera could expose everything. But moving forward, Desmond learns that after being terminated for something that was out of his hands, enraged, Max smashed his own truck into the quarry to demand his job back, injuring people and causing destruction. As Des was about to leave, the woman that had been contacting us through the radio static appears by the wall and says that the code to the safe is there. Using the mirror to acquire it, Desmond opens the safe to see the green-colored mushroom extract, the second compound for the pill. This extract comes from the same mushroom family as the first, but it's a completely different chemical with its own formula. This one produces a toxic overstimulating effect on the brain instead of the sedative hallucinogenic effect of the first compound. Moving forward, entering the lab, the woman appears in blue wavelengths as she talks about a radio man from the war and a link between radio signals and brainwaves. Before she disappears, she says rainbow could be possible. This is when Desmond finds the CIB report detailing what Mayer Pharmaceuticals and the government had been developing. The psychedelic liquid in the barrels is called Agent Rainbow. It is a biochemical mixture made from the liquefied so-called resurrected trippy mushrooms, a central nervous system stimulant, and a sedative. Past tests showed that it could cause amnesia, hysteria, psychosis, and hallucinations. But at the bottom, there is something worth highlighting. BZ Ultra is a reference to BZ, a real Cold War chemical agent the US military tested to induce confusion, hallucinations, and delirium. The Montauk files point to the Montauk Project, a set of stories tied to the MK Ultra era mind control experiments. The game uses these names to show that Agent Rainbow comes from the same legacy of secret psychological and chemical research. Together, they imply that the CIB had been trying to create a weapon either for fear or mind control, or both. However, now things are starting to click for Desmond. He, his patients, all of Milton Haven were just caught in the crossfire of a larger government experiment, and yet, that still doesn't solve the issue with Max, or the mystery of the lady who keeps talking to us, or that radio man from the war she mentioned. On the other side of the lab is a requisition form for hundreds of Agent Rainbow and the mushroom extract, placed on February 1st, and Desmond wonders if this is the same shipment from the Thanatos. It could line up, considering that all of the absolutely mental things that happen to everybody takes place a little bit over a month later. But moving on, Desmond finds the third ingredient, something called the Bolepo pheromone mix. The Associated Paper explains that this is an extremely potent pheromone taken from a rare Amazonian beetle, and its chemical substance forces creatures to swarm or cluster around it. The note says that it is so powerful that it can affect species beyond the beetle it comes from. Harvesting or exporting it is highly illegal because of how unstable and dangerous it is. Compared to the first two ingredients, one being a strong hallucinogen and the other a toxic psychoactive compound, this pheromone adds a biological pull that influences behavior. It makes sense since we're about to make a lure pill. And when combined with Agent Rainbow in liquid form, the document warns that it triggers a volatile reaction. So for those who might be a bit confused, I know I'm starting to get there due to all the chemicals and compounds being talked about, Agent Rainbow is one substance developed by Mayer and the CIB. The three other ingredients that we just got, the red, the green, the purple ones, the shrooms, the beetles, those are separate from Agent Rainbow, yet they are being manufactured alongside Agent Rainbow, and right now, Desmond needs these three ingredients to craft the lure pill. But they are all part of experimental products, part of a bigger, more sinister scheme. After mixing the pill, Desmond tests it on himself. The pill heals him, boosts his speed, and stops him from tiring for a short time, which shows how easily it could be weaponized. The report was also correct about its reaction with Agent Rainbow. When Desmond throws the pill onto the substance, it triggers a volatile explosion. The report also talked about its pheromone effects, so Desmond uses it to lure and guide Max through the toxic wasteland created by the company's dumping and toward the quarry entrance. Desmond finds a gazette dated November 6, 1996. This is when Mayer Pharma purchased both the facility and the quarry. As Max charges at Desmond, pursuing him all the way to the bottom of the quarry where Mayer had been stashing even more of their products, he would begin ramming into everything and hurting himself in the process, showcasing how one's unbridled rage can destroy everything around them and even themselves. His wrath and aggression was part of his armor, but once that plating had broken off, it exposes just a man hurting beneath. But wrath was the only thing he knew, so he kept getting up, getting angry. So Desmond would have to pill him up.
The pills calm him down. It's working.
Hooking him up with drugs and dredging up his truck, he breaks and finally admits that he was hurt and just wanted his life back.
I miss my family. I'm sorry, Maddie. Daddy will make it. I failed them.
It's okay. She will always be your daughter. You will always be her dad. Max tried to fight back and died for it. Your death won't be in vain. Thank you for leading me here.
Leaving, Desmond listens to his recordings on the way back to his office. He hears how defensive Max gets when asked if there was violence growing up. He retorts that, as a kid, there wasn't violence, there was discipline. But then Max gets sidetracked, screaming at the cat to get out of the office because Tanya was irritating him. Desmond would calmly but firmly say, "Let's not threaten the cat." Max apologizes and explains that he didn't mean to blow up, that he does get angry sometimes, but that it's warranted. He lost his job over one accident when he'd had perfect driving for 2 decades. This was before Mayer took over, but Desmond's attention gets piqued when Max says that he was exposed to Agent Rainbow, that it made him sick and was probably poisonous, and just like the other patients, Max suffered from memory loss. Consumed by his thoughts, Max ignites again, saying how is he supposed to prove to the courts that he can take care of his daughter without a job? So he says he's going to go back to the quarry and demand that they rehire him. But then Max mentions an army hippie guy who had offered him $200 if Max could get him into the quarry. Desmond tried to get Max to calm down, but he just tells him, "Try and stop me," and he leaves. But that army guy, is this the radio man from the war that the lady spoke about? Returning to the office, Desmond receives a call. A panicked man tells him that they took her and that they might be coming after Dr. Wales next, just for having therapy sessions with him. But before he hangs up, he encourages Desmond to call him back so they can figure out what to do. And then he says, "Don't drink from the tap." Rainbow is in Milton Haven's water. Tanya speaks up, saying that was Lucas Cole. However, before going to his apartment, Desmond wanted to review Max Dragon's patient file. So when I look at Max's file, the first thing that stands out is his diagnosis: intermittent explosive disorder with narcissistic tendencies, which is, by the way, slightly different than NPD. But that combination already tells us a lot. Intermittent explosive disorder is defined by sudden aggressive outbursts that are out of proportion to the situation, while narcissistic traits tilt a person towards fragile self-esteem, blame shifting, and a constant need to always feel in control and respected. Court-mandated therapy after a domestic disturbance fits that pattern. Max isn't here because he wants help. He's here because the system forced him. And when you're listening to his recordings, you can hear the resistance in every voice line that Max speaks. Observing his personal history gives us the blueprint from where this all comes from. You see, Max grew up with a father who was incarcerated for violence towards his mother, and then he got a stepfather who was likely abusive as well. But you see, Max refuses to talk about it, and when he does, he frames it as discipline instead of violence. That is a classic way that children in abusive homes protect the image of their caregivers and protect themselves from admitting how unsafe things really were. It's also a conditioned way that kids try to understand things that they just don't understand. But also at the same time, Max carries a deep-seated resentment towards his mother for having an affair and remarrying. This twists his anger towards the person who tried to leave. So Max learns two core lessons here: that violence is how men express power, and that women who try to change the situation become targets. This would also plant the seed for abandonment issues. So later in life, when his wife, Alice, or ex-wife, pulls away or threatens his sense of stability, these old templates wake up. The patient file notes that Max has a 10-year-old daughter, Maddie, and that Alice and Maddie have moved out. Max refuses to call Alice his ex-wife and talks as if separation is just temporary, which shows a lot of denial and a deep fear of that abandonment. His identity is built on being the husband, the father, the provider. Losing his job at Meyer after the truck accident, which wasn't really his fault, and then losing his daily access to his daughter, whom I think he really loves and cares for, hits all of these roles all at once. Research on anger and control shows that people with this kind of background react especially strongly when their role or status feels threatened. And in Max's case, any sign that somebody else has power over his life lights that fuse. The court, Mayor Pharmaceuticals, Alice, even Desmond, his therapist. This is why the notes say he becomes intensely jealous. He redirects blame and insists that he's only angry because everybody else is out to get him. The narcissistic traits in his file I think they're less about vanity and more about defense. When Desmond confronts him, Max changes the subject. He gets louder, and he pushes responsibility onto his wife or his employer. Psychologists call this projection and externalization. You see, when it comes to Max, admitting fault would mean facing the idea that he is just like the violent men he grew up with, and that thought is unbearable. So his mind pushes it away, pushes it down, tries to cast himself instead as the victim, which he was when he was a kid for a long time. You see the same pattern in the quarry sequence. Max rams his way through walls and machinery, hurting himself in the process because rage feels safer than grief. Anger is the one emotion that he as a man is allowed to feel. His monster, his bull form, is a psychological version of how he copes. Charges forward, destroys whatever's in front of him, and never stops long enough to feel the loss underneath. Agent Rainbow makes all of his traumas, fears, and insecurities worse. But it doesn't create these from scratch. And that's the thing to conceptualize here. It's the fact that Agent Rainbow doesn't create or incite brand new fears. It takes what's already there and amplifies that darkness. Virginia, Alan, already had demons inside of them, but the psychoactive agents empowered it, made it stronger, leading them to their own deaths. They are their own worst enemies. Max already had poor impulse control, a history of violence, and a tendency to see himself as persecuted. Exposure to a psychoactive agent that causes confusion, memory problems, and heightened emotional reactivity is like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning. When he talks about getting sick from Agent Rainbow and then storms back to the quarry to demand his job back, you're watching his pre-existing patterns collide with a brain that is now even less able to slow down or think clearly. That is why when Desmond finally pills him up and the armor of anger starts to crack, Max collapses into what was hiding under his explosions the whole time. A scared man who misses his family and does not know who he is without them. He doesn't want to be without them, which is completely valid and understandable, by the way. I love my wife and I'd be pissed too if something happened to her. But heading down the elevator, Agent Rainbow would get in the way again.
Oops, this one's on me. The elevator was supposed to drop all the way down and explode. Since you're stuck there, starving to death, how about you take this opportunity to reflect on what a major pain in the ass you've been?
Now, Desmond would have had no way out, but luckily, Tanya saved him. The two trudged through frigid vents until he eventually made it out to where he found that letter on how to find the pistol, which made him realize L stands for Lucas. Lucas was the prepper who left the note here. Heading out, Desmond realizes that the rainbow waters have now flooded the entrance. It is only a matter of time before all of Milton Haven is submerged. Now inside of Lucas's apartment, Desmond would find a post-it, referring to the life expectancy of a radio man being 5 seconds. Now, radio men in real-world combat were notorious targets because the antenna and equipment made them easy to spot, and as you probably can ascertain, taking them out crippled communications, providing huge tactical advantages to the enemies. Naturally, radio men were some of the most targeted soldiers in World War II and Vietnam. Their survival time was notoriously short. The 5 seconds line is dramatic, but it echoes the real history in a way that builds Lucas's character. Checking around, Desmond would find a note Lucas wrote, stating that the government and the CIB had been experimenting with psychoactive drugs since 1945, listing out more references. Cole even had a paper of known Mayor Pharma and associate locations, with one just being blocks from the White House. Heading over to his room, Desmond discovered that Cole had his sights on Bill Bird, a CIB agent involved in everything. But with Cole's tape, he heads back to his office.
When I tell you to do something, you ignore me. But when a disheveled maniac like Lucas gives you false hope, you obey him without question? At this point, it's hard not to take it as an insult. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's only me.
Agent Rainbow refers to Lucas as a disheveled maniac, a war nut, but his color is green, something that inspires feelings of calm, stability, and nature, and when Desmond enters his memory, you can hear just how collected he is in his speech.
Nice place you got here. Cozy. And this table? Is it mahogany or oak?
I actually have no idea. Alright, Mr. Cole. Why don't you sit down so we can start with the basics? Have you ever had therapy or counseling before?
Straight to the point, huh, Doc? Sorry, You're not the first therapist I've met with, but I sometimes find it difficult to open up. Past therapy sessions were very productive.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm not a super social guy, so you're the first person I've spoken more than a sentence with since I moved here. About a month ago.
Sure, he might be socially nervous, but he's cool and doesn't seem crazy, at least right now. Because when he opens up, things speed up a bit. He's a little more exasperated with his voice, yet still steadily explains that usually how his sessions go is he talks about his military service, then about horrifying experiments, government conspiracies, and cover-ups, and then his therapist looks at him like he needs to be in a psych ward. But Desmond reassures Lucas that he's genuinely there to listen. In the Elysium State Park, Desmond finds Lucas's cabin where he reads his 505th diary entry talking about how he met a scientist working on Agent Rainbow. Lucas was going to meet with her because she agreed to give him damning documents to blow the lid off the company and government's cover. In another entry, Lucas found evidence of a fear gas that was being tested in the 1960s, which was initially shut down at first, but has since then been revived. Grabbing the radio off the desk, he continues to gather intel, starting with a letter from Rosemary James, the same scientist mentioned back at the quarry. He finally realizes that the figure who kept appearing in blue wavelengths and speaking to him was Rose, trying to communicate with him this entire time. In the letter, she explains that she once interviewed a radio man who survived an Agent Rainbow encounter in the late 1960s, and that conversation made her suspect a link between radio waves and the chemicals' effects on the brain. She delineates that the brain naturally emits electromagnetic activity, but its frequency is usually too different from radio signals to ever interact. However, Agent Rainbow removes that barrier and forces them to interfere. So, Rose then adds that understanding Agent Rainbow requires comprehending both brain chemistry and mental processes. She continues that the chemical drags repressed traits to the surface in a very similar way to the Jungian idea of the shadow. But then Rose warns that when Rainbow forces a person to confront everything they try to hide from themselves, the experience becomes overwhelming and leads to rapid psychological breakdown and eventually death. You see how everything's connecting and how this game kind of has that Silent Hill 2 feel a bit? But in case you haven't seen my psychoanalysis videos explaining what Rose is talking about, for those who are unaware about Jung's idea of the shadow, I'm going to explain that right now. So, Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who believed that everybody carries parts of themselves that they push out of active conscious awareness. These are traits that we dislike, avoid, or never learned how to deal with, so the mind keeps them out of sight. Carl Jung called this hidden collection the shadow. It includes impulses, emotions, memories, or desires that don't fit the version of ourselves that we want to consciously present outwardly. The shadow is simply the side of a person that holds everything that they try to suppress. Jung argued that mental health improves when somebody slowly becomes aware of these buried parts because facing them directly allows the mind to stay more stable and less divided. And then we could talk about the psychological concept of integration, but for now, Desmond has to fight Lucas's shadow, his monster, the Flash. A dark reflection of his past as a radio man, shaped into a towering creature made from twisted skeletal metal beams, antennae, and rotting radio tower parts. Its single blinding spotlight functions like a weaponized searchlight, sweeping across the forest as if scanning for signals or enemies the way Lucas once did. Even his voice is robotic. And when you remember the scene back at Icarus Lighthouse, when a massive spotlight rose behind Thanatos just before the crash, it raises the question, or at least the possibility, Lucas might have been aboard that ship. But pushing forward, Desmond is pulled into Lucas's war memories, where the world erupts into blood-red chaos, screaming, gunfire, and the sharp whistle of artillery falling from the sky. However, he unmistakably sees Agent Rainbow on the battlefield. This suggests that during Lucas's time as a radio man, he was exposed to Rainbow, or an early version of it, long before Milton Haven ever saw a chemical spill. Snapped back to relative reality, Desmond comes to a bunker door, but he can't open it without a code. Turning around, Flash drops down from the sky trying to find Desmond, but he can't. Escaping him, soon Rose would tell Desmond how to find the codes.
To enter the code, 4 towers. Look to the stars.
Slogging forward, Desmond reaches the water treatment facility, or WTF, and finds a note from a worker named Lisa. She explains that she took home just 3 drops of the town's contaminated water to study it, and even that tiny amount was enough to get her down with the sickness. And now, every drop of water in Milton Haven is contaminated with Agent Rainbow. Eventually, Desmond would find a voice recording of Lucas mentioning his best friend Wheeler, somebody he fought in the war with. It's later revealed that he accidentally killed Wheeler whilst under the effects of Agent Rainbow, supporting the theory that the chemicals were being used in the war. Of course, when he told people back at base, nobody believed him, except one other person who confessed that he could hear Lucas's thoughts as if they shared a connection. However, Lucas would be discharged from the army for being deemed insane, and was sent home where he would never stop trying to find answers. One night, he found a frequency that told him just 2 words, Agent Rainbow. Following that signal led him to Milton Haven. Continuing into a church, Desmond would see Rose appear before him again, talking about the crash, the accident, the signal, and what if she talked back. It seems somehow what she said about using Rainbow to connect mind and radio waves allowed her to communicate almost telepathically with others also infected with Rainbow. Desmond would gradually see the pieces begin to form a picture, how Lucas had his thoughts shared with that other soldier, how Rose had been communicating with Desmond, and how he and his patients kept crossing over into each other's minds. And yet, there was still one piece missing, and Desmond had to find it to completely understand what he was looking at. Outside in the rain, Desmond would find a fresh grave. On it was a vinyl with Rosemary's name on it, signifying that Rose was dead. And yet, somehow, she, or at least her consciousness, lived on through Agent Rainbow to guide Desmond. At least that's how he interpreted it. He still wasn't sure if this was even real or just a really visceral nightmare. But then, Desmond would follow another signal. On the other side of the church was a small grave for Desmond's cat, Tanya. She was dead, but also still with Desmond. In fact, she even tells him right now to never mind this, that they have other things to take care of. But Desmond would linger, struggling to remember what happened, struggling to understand why he felt guilty. Her lone red collar lay atop of the stones, and in front was a white lily. He wouldn't find any answers staring at the rocks, so he continued.
People become walking radio towers. They hear, see unknown places, faces. Drives them mad.
As Wales moves through the cemetery, he thought about what Rose said. Was she suggesting that infected people began to broadcast a kind of signal that other infected people could pick up? And if that happened, would it explain why people were seeing memories and experiences that didn't belong to them, as if their minds were bleeding into each other? Rose would blip in again to say that fear was just a side effect of Agent Rainbow. But if fear was just a side effect, what was the main effect? What was the main function? Entering the crypt, she would answer that very question.
Rainbow's true potential lies in the collective unconscious.
This was the last piece Desmond needed to understand the situation. Agent Rainbow linked the minds of everybody who was exposed to it, pooling into one grand mind. This link allowed Desmond to enter the inner spaces of his patients and observe their lives with clear detail that should not have been available to him. It allowed objects to appear across different mental spaces. It enabled Alan to dream his way into Virginia's nightmare, even though the two had no direct connection. The effect functioned like a forced and exaggerated version of Carl Jung's unempirical idea of the collective unconscious, which describes a shared space that humans can access without intending to. It does start to lead into the conversation of evolutionary psychology, but we're not going to get into that. In Milton Haven, the chemical exposure placed everyone inside a single network of memories and emotional states. Rainbow connects all. And yet Desmond knows how wicked the company and government can be. They'd find a way to weaponize this, so now he knows he needs to stop them. He knows he needs help. Locked behind a gate and needing to find 9 fuses, Desmond absolutely dreads this idea, wondering who designed the generator like this. Desmond would reach the final tower, but would get stumped for about 30 minutes trying to figure out what to do and where to go. But it turns out that there was just a piece of wood that was too far for him to see. Shooting it off gave him radio access, bringing the elevator down for him to go up.
You're not all there today, are you? Staring out the window a lot.
Yes. I apologize.
It's about that cat of yours, Tanya, right? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? My name is Rosemary James. I need your help.
Lucas, is everything all right?
Rose appears to have reached Lucas during one of their sessions. She wanted Lucas to stop the chain of events, and she wanted Desmond now to do the same. Entering the bunker, Desmond uncovers Rosemary James's data logs. The pages outline the complete truth behind Agent Rainbow and the research that led to the collapse of Milton Haven. She begins by acknowledging that Rainbow is unstable and dangerous, but she initially believed that the project could replace traditional warfare if they learned how to control it. The ship crash weighed heavily on her, but she suspected that their experiments are what actually contributed to that disaster. After the crash, the team was sealed inside of the bunker as a safety measure, and during that time, she began hearing voices through the radio. She questioned whether the voices were coming from people affected by Rainbow and whether speaking back would trigger a stronger reaction. Her fears were confirmed when she discovered that Rainbow turns infected individuals into functioning radio towers. These people transmit and receive memories, emotions, and sensory experiences through a shared psychological network that she refers to as the collective unconscious. She spoke with affected individuals through her equipment and received descriptions of places that they'd never visited and people they'd never met. While fascinating, the constant flow of information overwhelmed them and destabilized their minds. Rose explains that her team made a breakthrough with their research. However, she also recognized the detrimental and catastrophic effects on exposed individuals and that it drove them mad. Once Rainbow forced this connection open, the mental flow could not be controlled, and the result was rapid cognitive breakdown followed by death. Finding a letter, Rosemary saw how much bad potential her discovery had and wanted to hide the rest of her work. But somebody named Ash wasn't going to let her. Ash informed all of their higher-ups and gave them all of her research. As a result, Rose would have to try and stop Mayer from learning how to mind control people, but she needed help. She needed Lucas's help to carry on her mission. Rising to the top and using the satellite to fight Lucas's monster, Desmond listens as the Iron Giant tells him that nobody believes him and that the people treat him as if he is old and unstable.
Lucas knew there was more to this than meets the eye. I need to make contact with him.
Desmond responds by saying that he does believe him, and it is this reassurance that is enough for Lucas's shadow to leap into the forest and tell Desmond to contact him. Using the satellite Rose once used, he does just that.
Is there anybody out there? Hello? Lucas Cole, if you can hear me, this is Desmond Wales. Do you read?
Holy hell! How are you doing this? Are you okay?
I'm hanging in there, but I could use your help. Can you get to my office?
I read you loud and clear, brother. Help is on the way.
Yes! It's all starting to make sense now.
When he gets back to the office, he and Tanya update one another, but then the phone rings. Rainbow is on the other end, saying it's time for them to fight. But Desmond would want to take a look at Lucas's file, since he was the last of his patients that was still alive. Well, technically Alan is alive, but comatose, so I don't know if it counts. So when I look at Lucas's file, the first thing I see is a man with PTSD, layered on top of suspected delusions and paranoia. He grew up as a high-achieving kid who could have gone to college, but he chose the army instead because of his father, and he found a niche with electronics as a radio man. And as mentioned, this meant that Lucas was always under constant exposure to threat. Research on combat vets show that repeated life-threatening events and watching friends die are two of the strongest predictors of PTSD symptoms, which matches the way that Lucas talks about combat, the loss of his best friend, and the way that his nervous system still spikes when war memories surface. What happened with Agent Rainbow in the war adds moral injury on top of that trauma. Moral injury describes the psychological damage that happens when somebody feels they have violated their own core values or been forced into situations that betray those values that they have for themselves. And studies on veterans connect this type of guilt and shame to higher rates and severity levels of PTSD, depression, and anger. Lucas accidentally killed his best friend while under the influence of a weaponized chemical that he never consented to, that he wasn't even aware of, and then he watched officials dismiss his accounts and write him off as a nutcase. That is a lethal combination, a mix of self-blame and betrayal by the institution that was supposed to protect him, which also explains why he becomes obsessed with finding proof. Evidence would show that he was not crazy and that Wheeler's death had a cause outside of his own will. He is looking for a way to alleviate himself of guilt. His file also notes paranoid tendencies and possible delusional disorder, yet his behavior in sessions feel thoughtful, or at least it sounds thoughtful and organized, with those intensity spikes mentioned, when the conversation shifts to war and government cover-ups. And so I would go even further to say, because there's overlapping symptoms that make it a bit harder to diagnose, that this pattern is closer to PTSD with secondary psychotic features than to a primary single psychotic disorder. In this subtype, people with trauma re-experience events, hear voices tied to those memories, or develop persecutory ideas that grow out of real betrayals, just like Lucas experienced as a combat veteran. And a lot of his prepper behavior reads like chronic hypervigilance. He caches weapons, keeps detailed files, tracks mayor facilities, and studies government programs because those actions make him feel less helpless. Safety behaviors like these temporarily reduce anxiety but keep the brain on high alert, and anxiety research shows that this kind of constant checking and preparation prevents fear from naturally decreasing over time. You've probably heard or done this yourself if you've served. Back to the wall, know the exit, keep tabs on everybody in the room, whoever goes in and goes out, always be prepared for anything. And so you probably relate to Lucas in the sense that Lucas never gets to relax because he's always scanning for the next threat or clue. At the same time, his identity as a radio man never really ended. In the army, he was a radio man. In Milton Haven, as a civilian, he turned his whole life into a broadcast aimed at anybody who would listen. The Flash is a direct expression of that identity. He's constantly looking to communicate. He's looking for people to look at him. You know what I mean? Now, Lucas's relationship with Desmond is where his healthier traits show. He comes to therapy on his own, he explains his story in detail, and he keeps trying despite years of being brushed off. That takes a lot of persistence for somebody who already feels persecuted. When Desmond tells him that he believes him, the shift in Lucas is immediate. It's like, yes, someone hears me. Someone is open to listening. Oh shit, somebody believes me now. Lucas's shadow self stops attacking and instead becomes an ally who asks to be called upon when help is needed. This fits research showing that trauma survivors who receive validation, and by the way, and I've mentioned this before, you don't have to serve in the military to have trauma or have PTSD. You can be somebody who grew up in very bad situations to have PTSD or just trauma. So this applies to you too, is what I'm trying to say. Trauma survivors who receive validation and are allowed to share their story in a safe relationship show lower levels of distress and better treatment outcomes than those who are dismissed or silenced. People want to be heard. People want to connect with others. There's nothing wrong with that. But Agent Rainbow intensifies all of Lucas's internal horrors by linking his mind into a network of fear-saturated memories. At the same time, the same network amplifies his strongest protective trait, which is his drive to warn and protect others. And I think that says a lot about Lucas as a character himself, the level of resistance and power that he has, the willpower that he has. Keep in mind, he got infected with Rainbow decades ago, but he is still in sound mind. I think that's pretty cool. But his monster is terrifying, and yet it is still him, with the heart of a radio man who refuses to hang up the call. Bro, that's a fucking line right there. Radio man who refuses to hang up the call? Damn, chat, who gave me the right to write so wickedly? Someone call a doctor because these scripts are sickening sometimes. Fuck, I'm so corny. However, remembering there were sections of his patient's apartments that were previously blocked off, Desmond could now open those areas up to find out what they were hiding. In Lucas's apartment, he had a prayer that he wrote for his best friend, apologizing for what he did and asking for strength. Desmond would also find the Rorschach test that he ran on him, where when Lucas saw the third image, he felt a bit hyper-aroused because he saw his own monster in the ink blots. Alan saw his black hole, a sinkhole version of himself in his test, and it opened up a pit in his stomach. We also find a note that he wrote about two men whispering outside of his window taking pics of his house, but by the time he went out, they were gone, and he can't discern if what he saw was real or not. Ramming a car into Max's daughter's room, Desmond would gain insight into Maddie's recollection of things. She came home from school to find her mom crying because her dad kicked a chair across the room, which scared her. As a consequence, she would take them both to go live with her sister. Maddie hoped that her dad would find a job working as a car mechanic instead of driving because she thought that would make him happier. Finding Max's test, he recognizes the bull, but he doesn't show fear. It's like he just knows and accepts it for what it is. When finding Virginia's transcript of when she saw her monster, she simply said it made her feel powerful. Desmond returns to his office. He inserts the rainbow tape left by his stalker, and the moment it begins to play, the entire room shakes and the light snaps off. However, instead of the usual glow coming from the office door, behind him, a deep purple light spills out from his closet, casting the space into an eerie, otherworldly hue.
All eyes on me now, open wide. You know what's wrong with you, a lethal case of deja vu. Sit on the edge, stare into the void. Maybe you're sane, or maybe just paranoid. I hear them. Oh, here comes the savior. Who can break these thoughts away from me? Oh, no more bad behavior. School my head on right for a moderate fee.
Ready.
Stepping inside, Desmond crosses a distorted, netherworld-like space to locate Agent Rainbow, who speaks to him as he traverses, telling him that he was never a government operative and that he exists as a chemical inside of Desmond's psyche. He explains that he is Desmond's personal agent, the same way each patient had a monster shaped by their own fears and history. Agent Rainbow has one goal, the same he and the other Rainbows did for their hosts, to psychologically erode Desmond until he gives up altogether.
Not this time.
But Desmond would only laugh at his monster, saying that he's been waiting to kick his ass. Despite his brain literally shutting down, he would still fight. By saying reaffirming and positive things, he was able to fight back against the chemicals that were supercharging the deep-seated insecurities that he'd been holding on to. Desmond blamed himself for not being able to save his patients. He blamed himself for maybe driving them towards their death, but above all, he felt guilty for being the only one who survived. As the fight continued, his shadow self would try to play down his efforts and convince him to give up. But what we have here is a man who acknowledges his dark side and accepts it. This integration gives him power, and it disables Agent Rainbow's. And then Desmond drops a corny line.
I'm afraid your time is up. The next time you want to talk to me, make an appointment.
Catching his hat and donning it himself, Desmond Wales leaves. Recording, he talks about how things are clearing up for him and that he is in sound mind. he's going to stop mayors and the government. But back in his office, he would talk to his cat, who mentions that they are stuck inside of his mind still. He hands him a key and tells him to go check out the locked room in his apartment, that he's ready for it. Once inside, we see what Desmond was keeping locked away this entire time. His wife, Magdalena, passed away. Already, bro, I'm just like, if my wife died, I would just not want to do anything. But Asmund's wife talks about how they spent 4 years together, which meant the world for her, but she says she can't do it anymore, that she wants to be— wait a minute. I thought she was dead. Wait, did Mag just leave him? Oh, never mind. Yeah, my bad, she's not dead. She just left him because of how overprotective and paranoid he was, and how he couldn't get out of his own head. I mean, I hope she's happy. She deserves that. And I'm certain Des was difficult to be in a relationship with, but then in a letter he wrote to his cat, he remembers that Tanya died. He remembers that he killed her. He didn't know that lilies were extremely poisonous. They are extremely poisonous to any cat owners out there. They are extremely poisonous to cats, that even their pollen can lead to rapid kidney failure in felines. Desmond regrets his ignorance, regrets getting mad any time that she would, well, be a cat, but he thanks her for being his friend. And damn, reading this makes me feel some type of way with our cats. My wife and I have 2 kitties. They're both 1, and eventually they're gonna get old, and I gotta remember to appreciate them while they're still young and playful. So this was a good reminder from a game. But then we see that while drunk, Desmond did something a psychologist should never do: self-psychoanalyze. But he is surprisingly honest with himself here. You see, Desmond's story reaches a point where the audience can finally see him clearly. The entire game, Desmond spends his time trying to understand his patients, yet he never applied the same level of honesty to himself. He helped them fight monsters, but he didn't even realize he had his own monster sitting on his own shoulders. Desmond is the type of guy to rely on logic and his training to avoid having to face grief or guilt. In fact, reading his ex-girlfriend's words reveals a therapist who questions every decision that he makes. He doubts whether he's helped people or harmed them. He questions whether his own advice is sincere or performative. He feels responsible for his patients who kept dying under his care or disappearing. The guy works alone, he isolates, he hides behind clinical analysis because it feels safer than dealing with his own pain. Desmond never learned how to sit with his own emotions, only the emotions of others. And that diagnosis at the very top of the file shows the truth that he drunkenly recognizes about himself. Paradoxically, paranoid. Somebody who understands paranoia on an intellectual level, but does not recognize it in their own behavior. Desmond uses psychology as a shield, but he doesn't have personal insight. But he also psychoanalyzed his cat, which when you really think about it, kind of says more about Desmond than Tanya, ironically. Desmond turns everything into a clinical document because that is the only framework that he trusts to stay grounded. It's a space where he understands everything. It's the structure that he uses to stop himself from drowning in uncertainty, from having to sit with his own thoughts. Like, just imagine a guy who spends all his time psychoanalyzing everybody else. He probably does that because he doesn't want to spend time thinking about his own shit. You know what? Desmond should start a YouTube channel. Even when he writes playfully, he's still leaning on that habit of turning life into a case file, which is something that his ex-lover called him out on. And the way that he writes about Tanya, with warmth, exaggeration, and the dramatic mythologizing, which is cute by the way, it shows how much she anchors him, how she was the only stable connection that he had left after his ex-girl left. The file is funny on the surface, but really it kind of shows a man who is exhausted, lonely, and barely holding himself together. However, in the file itself, he writes about her kittenhood trauma from being potentially abandoned as a kitten 9 years ago, where she showed up on his doorstep, frail and malnourished. She chose him, and they'd be best friends for the next decade. And he describes her dramatic catatonia. You see Tonya? You see the play on words there? Laziness. He describes her laziness, comparing her to Egyptian royalty. But jokes aside, it's obvious that Tanya is the closest thing that he has to family, which made her death and the fact that it was his fault all the more heart-tearing.
I wish this ending could have been a happier one.
But
life doesn't work that way. Getting rid of me will be the challenge of a lifetime. You may have won the battle, but you've only saved yourself. Agent Rainbow is still out there, and you are powerless to stop what's coming.
Don't listen to him. He's afraid because he knows exactly what you're capable of.
What am I capable of?
Time will tell. Patience and grace.
So, this is goodbye?
You said goodbye before. I wouldn't lose any sleep on it.
I'm sorry. It was my fault. I should have known.
You did your best. You loved me, and that's all I ever cared about. Besides, I live on. In your head, so that's something.
Thank you, Tanya. For everything. You're a real cool cat.
Yeah. I know.
But that still wasn't everything, because Lucas would finally find Desmond, who had been drugged by the government but was still alive, and now Desmond could escape his mind.
Desmond! Desmond, can you hear me? Are you in there? Damn it. Desmond! You're breathing. Yes. I heard you, man. I heard you in the back of my mind. My goodness, what did you do to this place? Judging by the package on the table, I guess they got to you before I did. Bastards. You'll be all right, my friend. Rest. And when you feel better, we'll take the fight to them.
Abuse. I found a sense of agency.